Hey everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one, I'm taking a look at Punisher, which also got his T3 with the update that came with Captain America. It's kind of strange that they chose to upgrade Punisher in the same mid-month update with Captain America, considering that they're both combat, and Captain America in a way overshadows Punisher. They did try to make a little bit of a distinction by giving Punisher some unique effects that are different from Captain America, and makes him excel a little bit more towards PvP, so that's what I tested. However, to make the video more interesting, I also did test him in PvE with this uniform and also his Cosmic Ghost Rider uniform. Because the character obviously got his T3 upgrade this patch along with the uniform, I wanted to see how his uniform alone, with these skills 1 through 5, worked in World Boss Ultimate to kind of gauge how good the uniform is in itself. Unfortunately, this uniform doesn't seem to be situated for PvE, at least at T2, since I wasn't even able to clear a stage 99 of Thanos and had about 4 bars left when the time ended. Keep in mind that this is without a damage proc, most of the testing is like that, but at the same time, many of the uniforms that have come out this year, I have been able to clear stage 99 of Thanos, and in fact have done so with well over a minute left for most of those characters. Versus Proxima, the character does perform better for 2 reasons. One of them is because he has a lot of paralysis in his kit. He has it on his 5th skill and his 3rd skill, so he can lock down the opponent a little bit more and keep them from not taking damage or avoiding his damage. And then additionally, he also has all defense down that ignores immunity on the 4th skill. However, that only goes to a max of 30%, so it's not really that great compared to some of the modern uniforms that have come out. Most of the physical characters that I've tested this year have been able to complete Proxima stage 99 with no damage proc in about 60 seconds or less. So Punisher is basically taking twice as long. It's not until you take the character to T3 when you'll notice a sizable improvement. I went from not being able to clear this stage at all and was left with 4 bars at the end to being able to complete it 2 minutes and 30 seconds faster. Similarly, versus Proxima, he cleared the stage 60 seconds faster than before, or in 40 seconds outright. In many ways, the character plays very similar to Hela in that these skills 1 through 5 don't really do that much damage, and it's left up to the ultimate to make up the difference. This is a little bit odd since he does have so many offensive buffs, including a 50% damage increase versus villains on his uniform effect, and being able to go past the critical damage cap by about 80% at a 40% chance when he crits. On top of that, he also has a 50% damage increase on his 3rd skill, another one on his 4th skill, and a 60% damage increase on his ultimate, as well as a 100% damage increase for the ultimate itself. This probably explains why the ultimate hits so hard, but it doesn't really explain why the rest of his skills don't do that much damage. If I had to guess, it's probably because of the lack of hits, since the 3rd skill doesn't really have many hits on it, and you can't really wait for the counter skill to activate. So you're basically just left with the 4th and 5th skill for the most part. If you want to build the character for PvE, which I wouldn't really recommend, the most ideal option will more than likely be a CTP of Rage, despite the fact that he doesn't have any guaranteed crit. One of the reasons for this is because you have to delay cancel your 4th skill, which might mess up your single skill damage proc, even though you might possibly be able to make it work. The other reason is because you have crit damage already on his kit, as well as the capability of going past the cap like I mentioned. So by going with Rage, you don't really have to worry about making up that missing stat. You can see from the clear time in this clip why I wouldn't recommend going with a PvE build, since I was able to clear with about 2 minutes left, and if you've watched my other videos, most characters that show potential for being good at PvE are able to clear stage 9 with no leadership or supports and no damage proc, with at the very least 2 minutes and 30 seconds left. I was actually curious to see how the previous uniform, the Cosmic Ghost Rider one, would be able to fare now that he has the T3 and can go into the World Boss Legend stages, and I found out that it was a little bit worse than the new uniform by about 20 seconds. Because I wanted to see how the character kind of scaled up at higher stages, I also took him into a stage 19, again with no leadership or supports, and he wasn't actually able to complete this stage since it took him longer than 2 minutes to complete the first phase. The Cosmic Ghost Rider uniform was around 30 seconds slower this time around, as opposed to 20 seconds slower. The reason for this is probably because the damage accumulation on the third skill is for damage taken, so as you get to higher stages, it might become a little bit tougher to actually fill that up to max, whereas the new uniform doesn't have damage accumulation, it just has flat buffs, so you don't really need to worry about that. That said, even though the Cosmic Ghost Rider uniform is performing worse than the new uniform versus Knull, versus characters like Mephisto, he should actually be able to perform better since he doesn't have the type disadvantage being universal instead of combat, and in fact has a type advantage since universals have an increase versus all types. I didn't really bother testing this out because the character isn't really meant for PvE anyways, but if you do test it out, I'm pretty sure that's the result that you'll get. To further cement the fact that the character doesn't perform well in PvE modes, I also took him into ABX, and he wasn't even able to score 7 million there with the combat hero restriction setup. Most other characters that I test are able to score at least 8 million even with no damage proc, and again, I think that because he doesn't have too many hits in his kit is one of the reasons he struggles here. Similarly, versus Dormammu, he wasn't able to complete the first phase in under 2 minutes, which means that he likely wouldn't have been able to complete this fight. This is even worse considering the fact that I'm using White Fox as a support because he has the leadership tag and she provides a better improvement than most other supports. Yet it's still not enough for Punisher to do the first phase in time. As for the character's rotation, you do 3, cancel, and then you just do 4, delay cancel after he hits the ground, and then 5. You do the 1 and 2 as filler till those skills are back off cooldown. When you have your ultimate, you do the same thing, but this time you substitute the 5th skill for the 6th skill or the ultimate skill. So that means you would do 3, cancel 4, delay cancel 6. Although the character is clearly suboptimal in PvE, he does have way more value in PvP. However, even there, he does seem to have some issues versus the current meta, at least in terms of survival. That aside, his burst damage is surprisingly high for a T3 character, and especially for one that doesn't have a damage proc. The character's AI is also both good and bad. It's good because it always opens with the 3rd skill, which is your counter iframe ignore skill, and is the one that will basically one-shot all of your opponents. However, if that skill gets cancelled or interrupted, he basically just goes into his 2nd skill, which doesn't really do that much damage, and then follows up with the 5th skill afterwards, which is usually a little bit too late by that point. So it's good because it prioritizes his best skill, the 3rd skill. However, it also doesn't prioritize his other good skills like his 5th and his 4th skill, which also provides him with additional buffs and invincibility. As you can see, the character is able to take out some top metas pretty easily, I would say, which is quite surprising. However, he isn't necessarily winning fights by himself because, again, his survival seems to be a little bit worse than expected. Because of this, I would highly recommend giving him a survival-based build, such as with a CTP of Regen or a CTP of Authority. Between those two, I think that a CTP of Regen might give you a little bit more value, and it's the one that I used for all my testing, because he has a lot of HP. He got 40% increased with his uniform passive now, and has a bunch overall since he's a combat type, and also because the 3rd skill that he spams pretty much all the time when it's off cooldown has 30% healing on it, which gets increased to roughly around 60% with the additional recovery that you get from that CTP. The mitigation from a steal effect on a mighty CTP of Authority won't necessarily be as good since he has 30% mitigation on his own uniform passive, and if you couple that with a max roll on the steal effect, you can only really get to 60%, which won't necessarily be enough to avoid a lot of damage. That said, it's not necessarily too bad since you do get Invincible that he otherwise doesn't really use through his kit. You also get that little bit of extra damage accumulation if you do drop under 50%, But the best benefit, I would say, is that you get that super guard break immunity, which could help you from being knocked out of the third skill and avoiding being able to one-shot the opponent. So in a way, the CTP authority will probably make him a little bit more offensive oriented, since he won't necessarily be knocked out of that third skill and it'll do a little bit more damage, whereas the penetration from a CTP of regen will probably make him a little bit tankier, since he'll heal more often and interrupt the opponent when that penetration triggers. Also note that the 60% penetration to all sources on the third skill doesn't actually activate until the counter skill triggers. So if the second part of that skill doesn't activate, the third won't provide you that buff. This means that the penetration from something like a CTP of destruction won't be completely redundant, but again, I feel that the character needs additional survival and doesn't really need the burst damage, since as you see here, I'm basically one-shotting all of the opponents whenever the third skill activates anyway. You're better off not using the character in timeline because there are far better options, but just to show you how good the character is with that third skill, here's me playing on manual, and you can see all I really need to do is just avoid the opponent's attacks and then use the third skill and it one-shots them anyway. You can't deny that that's pretty awesome, considering that I'm taking out native tier 2s, native tier 3s, and tier 4s with just a mighty regen. Even though the character is good in PvP, he likely won't see much usage in timeline, meaning that his most valuable mode is Alliance Conquest. Because the third skill has high skill priority, high burst damage, and a little bit of an AoE, he's basically going to be one-shotting the whole entire team almost instantly, sort of like a combat version of Adam Warlock. This is primarily why the character is so good in this mode, because you don't really need a top-end team or a top-end build to take out some really strong opponents. As you can see from this clip, I almost immediately one-shot Thanos even with the Hela support. However, versus characters like Hela, he will struggle a bit because she has that immoral artifact, and because Punisher doesn't tend to survive too well. It's also tricky to fight characters like Colossus because the third skill isn't an iframe itself, meaning that he will take reflect damage. All in all, I can't really recommend this uniform to most players, since the only real people that will see the most benefit from this uniform is people that play Alliance Conquest. So if you are a fan or avidly play that mode, then this is a decent pickup. However, for most other players, you won't really see much benefit in PvE or most other modes from getting this uniform. Even with that said, Captain America's newest uniform seems to fill a very similar role, and the character can be progressed to T4. So if you're low on crystals, I would probably advise going with the Captain America uniform before this one. I was kind of expecting the uniform to be a little bit better for survival, considering that he got that 40% additional health, and because he has 50% pierce damage reduction. However, that doesn't seem to be helping him too much, or it could be that he doesn't seem to be going into many iframe skills, or doesn't seem to activate his invincible or survival based effects. Nevertheless, the offense on the third skill is pretty awesome, but he's basically just a one-trick pony. I know a lot of people have gotten combat upgrade fatigue, including myself, since we've gotten so many back-to-back, but I'm still hoping that we get that Black Panther T4 upgrade before the next major update rolls around. Many people have also been asking me to update the AC tier list, so I'm likely going to be doing that next. Even if I don't make a video about it, I'll definitely make a post so you can check that out and use it kind of as a guide for Black Friday if you want to. Either way, that's pretty much the end of this video. If you haven't, please consider liking, subscribing, and sharing it, since it helps me out and I can make more videos for the community. As always, I appreciate you taking the time to watch these, so thank you, but the video is now over.